A recent Gallup poll showed that trust in the media is currently the second lowest in recorded history.
Yeah, that's right, Brandon. Another poll confirms that trust in the media is plunging. Out of 46 countries polled, it showed that Americans distrust the media more than the rest.
So what is driving this distrust? Are people right to distrust the media?
Yeah, absolutely. Americans are 100% right to be worried about the direction our media has taken. And that's because in the last 2 decades, the media has gone through radical and profound transformations. And we're going to look at what happened.
I'm Brendan Fallon.
And I'm Lee Smith. And we're over the target.
We just talked about some examples from polls like Gallup that show that what people are experiencing isn't necessarily being reflected in what the media are reporting. Apart from that, we're also seeing this play out on the ground to some degree. I think the trucker protest that's currently taking place in Canada is a good example of this, where we've got a significant activity happening, but it's barely being represented at all in the media.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You can't really find anything about it in what we call the mainstream press, whether it's the New York Times or Washington Post or CNN. And this is an important movement, right? Because trucking is obviously very important to any economy and any society, getting food, most importantly, but getting other goods from place to place. And when these guys are saying, we don't want to do this and we're against the vaccine mandates, that's a vitally important thing to any society. And the fact that the American press is not covering what our cousins to the north are doing, that's an indication of what's happening. And this is why people are tending to distrust the press. It's not just a liberal slant, right? It's the failure to cover it at all.
The historical liberal slant of the media, that's something expected. That's something anyone who's been involved in media over the decades like yourself has seen. But you're suggesting what we're seeing now is something else.
Yeah, I think it has nothing to do with politics at this point. If you look at what we've seen over the last several years, whether we're talking about, we're talking about the practical defense of the pharmaceutical industry. This was always an industry that had the left concerned. The amount of money, it's the left that came up with the phrase big pharma. But now apparently big pharma is an ally, right? Because what we're talking about is not the historical left. Right? The historical left was always suspicious of the FBI, was always suspicious of the CIA, and yet nonetheless,
they were the man, right?
Yeah, exactly. This was the man. This is who you avoided. You're right.
Establishment.
Right. It was a cartoon picture of the establishment. They all were big pharma. Law enforcement authorities and America's clandestine service. Right. These were the people who were doing bad things in America and around the world.
Yeah, what you're describing, this sounds like a dramatic shift in the orientation of the purpose, the underlying operation of the press. Where do you see this starting? What was the turning point that led to this?
Yeah, this started with the advent of the internet. I saw it. I was working at the Village Voice, which is historically one of the most left-wing papers in world history. It was America's first alternative weekly. And the Village Voice, what they recognized that the advent of the internet was going to hurt their classified advertising, right? The Village Voice, if you were looking for an apartment in New York, you just moved to New York, you would make sure that you got to the newsstand at Times Square on Tuesday nights. You get an early copy of the Village Voice. The New York Times was dependent on classified advertising as well. Automotive, apartments, and employment. If you were looking to do these things in New York City, you had to buy the New York Times, right? And then you would have the large department store buys as well. You would have big jewelry ads. All of these things no longer exist, thanks almost exclusively to the advent of the internet. This meant that the financial model of the press collapsed. They had to do something in order to stay alive and to make money. And remember, newspapers across the country shut down. The ones that remained, like the Times, like the Washington Post, they had to come up with another solution in order to stay alive.
Well, I can see how this would be a really perplexing and devastating situation for media, not just in America, but across the world. And was it just such a dead-end situation? What about their corporate leadership? Couldn't they come up with some kind of solution to this problem?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. It wasn't just the advent of the internet. It wasn't just, it wasn't just the gods from on high in Parnassus throwing down the internet like a bolt of lightning and destroying the press. There were bad decisions made by corporate leadership. I'll give an example, that I saw well at the Village Voice. The decision was to start giving the paper away for free. They charged $1 beforehand, then they gave it away for free, reasoning there was no way to compete with things like, with Craigslist at the time. It wasn't just the Voice. This was media-wide. Most famously, the New York Times went back and forth for more than a decade, deciding whether or not they should charge for the paper or give it away for free. And during that time, of course, it leads news audiences to wonder, look, if they're saying that they don't know if their product is worth anything, how are we sure it's worth anything? So they ran down the product itself. Corporate leadership was suggesting that they didn't know if their product was worth paying for. That's a disaster. What industry gets away with that, saying like, yeah, we don't know if we should give it away for free or sell it, right? You can't possibly do that. Any kid who opens up a lemonade stand knows that if your product is worth something, you charge for it. The papers didn't do that.
I was just thinking, but at the same time, we do see criticism in mainstream media of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, the case of the Uyghur, the abuse of the Uyghur in Xinjiang, there's definite coverage of that situation. After a certain point, there was some attention to the potential lab leak origin of the coronavirus.
Yeah, that's very important. We shouldn't let a story or two that the press will cover distract us from the main event, which is that structurally, because of the networked corporate and political interests, these publications are pro-Beijing, right? When we're talking about the Uyghurs, if you look at and the coverage is important and the coverage is honest. And I'm not saying that every reporter in the American media is dishonest. But if we look at how the Uyghurs are talked about in the United States, it's such an abstraction, right? It's so far away. We read about this horrific this horrific tragedy, this horrific catastrophe unfolding every day. But for most readers, it's an abstraction. And what's obscured in all of this discussion of the Uyghurs, it's what's actually happening here in the United States. What this relationship, what our corporate and political elites' relationship with Chinese Communist Party elites, what this means for Americans, right? What this means for Americans here at home.
The example of the CCP's abuse of the Uyghur in Xinjiang, I'm sure this is an issue that most people have empathy for. But as you say, it is a kind of abstract concept for a lot of people. It's so far away, it's so removed from their own lives. So what is the impact on the average American? How is this relationship between the CCP and corporate and political interests, how is this impacting them in their everyday lives, would you say?
Oh, yeah. I think that all of us Americans who have lived through the last 2 years and has seen what has happened in our communities and in our neighborhoods as small businesses have closed, right? Small businesses, mom and pop stores, whether they're selling toys, whether they're selling furniture, they haven't been able to, they haven't been able to stay open. They haven't been able to manage the coronavirus crisis. Who has done okay? We all know. We've seen the numbers, right? Amazon has surged, right? People are ordering stuff, right? If they're not allowed to go out, if they're locked in, that hurts small businesses in our communities, and it's benefited large corporations like Amazon. And what is Amazon? Amazon is nothing but the #1 U.S. distributor for Chinese Communist Party goods, right? So that's benefited China. It's benefited Amazon.